In this video, I want to share with you how I get correct exposure on this Nikon D3500 and any other camera that has manual settings. Now the first question becomes, what is the correct exposure? Generally, correct exposure is the ability to retain details in highlights, shadows and midtones. When you use aperture priority or shutter priority, the camera will always adjust the settings to ensure that the exposure meter is always in the middle and your image will always be correctly exposed. But at times, as a creative, you want your image to be slightly underexposed or slightly overexposed, depending on the ability of your camera to recover details, because most of the time you find that a budget camera like this Nikon D3500 is not always capable of giving you correctly exposed images every single time. Sometimes you end up with an image that is slightly overexposed or an image that has shadows that have been crushed. So sometimes you want to intentionally underexpose or overexpose your image based on what you are able to recover later during editing. So correct exposure is not necessarily always having the exposure meter at the middle. It depends on what you want to achieve as a photographer. In that case, you need to use manual settings whereby you tell your camera exactly what you want to get, and at the end you get the results you intended to get. So to get a correctly exposed image or correct exposure with this Nikon D3500, the first step is to set your camera to manual mode and also make sure that everything else auto is turned off except maybe the white balance. So after setting your camera to manual mode, the next step is to set up the aperture. The reason why you need to set up the aperture is because the aperture is what gives you the image that you have in your mind. If you want deep depth of field, you can select f11 or those other crossed apertures, and if you want shallow depth of field, you can select f3.5, 2.8, 1.8 depending on the capabilities of the lens you have. So if you want deep depth of field, you can select maybe, for example, f11, and if your image is underexposed, you can decide whether you will change the shutter speed or the ISO to bring the exposure meter where you want it to be. As we all know, high ISOs will always give us noisy images, so for that reason we are going not to go beyond ISO 400, and if ISO 400 cannot give us the image we intend to get, then we will start playing around with shutter speed until we get a shutter speed that gives us the image we intend to get. So this is how you get correctly exposed images all the time. The main disadvantage of using this method is that it is not practical in all occasions because it requires a lot of setting up, and if you are shooting events that do not repeat, this method can be detrimental. And after using this camera for some time now, I have discovered that program mode is usable and gives you correctly exposed images. So if you want to do something very quickly, I would advise not going to this method. This method is very specific, maybe for something like landscape photography, product photography, or those creative photography modes like the rookie image, or you want to get a very specific look. That is when you have the liberty to change all the settings, to change your lighting setup. That is when this method is mostly applicable, but in other instances, aperture, shutter priority, those have their places and time. But this method is for those very specific images that you want to create or videos that you want to create. So that is my experience with manual settings and manual exposure. So in conclusion, I would say that correct exposure is not necessarily having the exposure meter at the 0 or not below or not above 0. Correct exposure is mostly what the photographer wants to get, or getting your camera to give you the image that you intended to get, the one you have in your mind. And being able to know the settings you need to change is what makes you a better photographer every single time, knowing how to get the image you want. So have a nice time and let us meet in the next video. Thank you.